When you choose not to reach out to a man, the first and most immediate effect is that silence begins to trigger curiosity and reflection in his mind, because human beings are naturally wired to notice absence, gaps, and patterns that change unexpectedly. And when a person who is accustomed to your presence, attention, or communication suddenly becomes less available, the brain instinctively tries to understand the reason, analyze the situation, and seek answers. And for many men, this absence is a moment of pause that interrupts routine patterns, prompting them to reflect on the connection, the value of the relationship, and their own behavior. Because when contact is consistent, it can sometimes be taken for granted, but the removal of that constant engagement suddenly makes the mind notice what was previously familiar and perhaps overlooked. And this curiosity is not limited to surface level thoughts, but often runs deeper, engaging both emotional and cognitive processes simultaneously. As he starts to consider how he feels, why he misses the interaction, and what it might mean in terms of his priorities, emotions, and potential attachment. And the effect of silence is amplified if the relationship had elements of emotional investment, shared experiences, or intimacy, because the brain registers the absence as a change in expected patterns, prompting a mix of intrigue, concern, and sometimes longing. And during this time, men may find themselves recalling memories, analyzing conversations, and wondering about unspoken feelings, because the lack of immediate contact forces the mind to fill in the void, often resulting in increased attention to details that were previously unnoticed. And this reflection may lead to heightened self-awareness as he considers his own actions, words, or contributions to the dynamic, asking questions like, did I do something wrong? Or does she really care? Or am I taking her for granted? And this internal dialogue is a critical mechanism for processing emotions, assessing attachment, and evaluating the value of the relationship, because humans often need contrast to recognize significance. And the absence of interaction creates the contrast necessary for such realization. And the curiosity sparked by silence often intertwines with a subtle sense of longing as the mind begins to measure the gap created by your unavailability, noticing not only what is missing, but also the ways in which your presence had previously added comfort, joy, or reassurance. And in many cases, this triggers a deeper appreciation of your qualities, contributions, or the emotional stability you provide, because absence allows perspective to develop that was not available in constant presence. And during this period, a man may also begin to consider hypothetical scenarios, imagine your reactions, or replay moments shared, because the brain is naturally motivated to understand the unknown and anticipate possible outcomes, which can result in heightened attention, increased thought frequency, and even unconscious behaviors such as checking for signs of your presence, revisiting old messages, or recalling shared experiences. And this process of reflection is critical for emotional evaluation, as he begins to separate habit from desire, assumption from genuine feeling, and casual interaction from meaningful connection. And the curiosity generated is often accompanied by questions of identity and compatibility, because absence prompts the mind to weigh the significance of the relationship against personal goals, values, and priorities, asking questions about the role of the connection in his life, the importance of mutual effort, and whether he is aligned with someone who provides stability, respect, and genuine interest. And the cognitive and emotional responses triggered by silence vary depending on personality, attachment style, and previous experiences. But universally, the gap creates a pause in automatic thinking, encouraging conscious reflection, problem solving, and reassessment. And this period also often engages the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, decision making, and social cognition, as he begins to consider possible next steps, reasons for the silence, and ways to re-engage, because the brain is motivated to restore equilibrium in the social connection and reduce the uncertainty caused by absence. And as curiosity grows, he may start to evaluate his emotional needs, boundaries, and expectations, analyzing what he values most in the relationship and what he is willing to invest, because absence acts as a mirror, reflecting back the significance of emotional bonds and the role that consistent interaction plays in maintaining closeness. And silence can also foster introspection regarding his behavior, attachment patterns, and emotional availability, prompting him to consider changes, improvements, or adjustments that may strengthen the connection in the future. Because self-awareness is often catalyzed by contrast, and your temporary distance provides the necessary contrast for such insights, and the impact of this silence is compounded when combined with uncertainty, as the mind is naturally drawn to resolve ambiguity, anticipate outcomes, and fill gaps in understanding, creating both cognitive engagement and emotional intensity. Because unresolved social cues activate the brain's reward and motivation systems, prompting increased attention and interest. And as curiosity develops into reflection, he may begin to evaluate not just the relationship itself, but also the personal qualities he admires in you, the comfort your presence provides, and the emotional security you represent. Because absence encourages the mind to weigh significance and reassess priorities, highlighting aspects of the relationship that were previously taken for granted. And ultimately, the decision not to reach out does more than create silence. It sparks a complex interplay of curiosity, emotional evaluation, self-reflection, and cognitive processing, which can result in increased awareness of feelings, recognition of the relationship's value, and potentially a stronger emotional connection, because the mind responds naturally to contrast, gaps, and uncertainty by seeking clarity, understanding, and resolution. And when done thoughtfully, this strategy encourages him to pause, reflect, and consider the depth of his own emotions, priorities, and desire, creating an environment where attraction, engagement, and appreciation can grow in response to your absence, reinforcing the truth that sometimes allowing space without communication is one of the most powerful ways to inspire attention, curiosity, and introspection in a man's mind. When you deliberately choose not to reach out, a man often begins to evaluate his own feelings and the nature of the relationship, because the sudden absence of communication creates a space where reflection becomes necessary, forcing him to assess not only his emotional responses, but also his investment, priorities, and attachment to you. And this evaluation starts subtly as he notices the void left by your silence, the missing presence that had become familiar and perhaps even comforting, prompting him to ask questions in his mind such as, how much do I care about this connection? Or does this relationship matter to me as much as I thought it did? And in doing so, he begins to separate automatic habits from genuine emotions, realizing that routine interactions may have masked the depth or significance of his feelings, because constant access to someone can often create complacency, but distance introduces contrast, making the heart and mind more aware of what is truly valued. And as he reflects, he considers the history of the relationship, analyzing past interactions, meaningful moments, conflicts, resolutions, and the ways in which connection has contributed to his emotional well-being, because reflection requires context, and the brain naturally retrieves memories to evaluate patterns, consistency, and alignment with personal desires and expectations. And this process engages both emotional and cognitive functions simultaneously, as he not only feels the absence, but also thinks critically about its implications, weighing how important it is for him to maintain contact, the level of effort he is willing to invest, and whether the relationship aligns with his long-term goals or values. And during this internal assessment, he may also experience a range of emotions, from longing and curiosity to frustration or even doubt, because evaluating feelings is rarely a purely rational exercise. It is influenced by desire, attachment, fear of loss, and the natural human need for connection. And as he navigates this emotional landscape, he begins to recognize patterns in his own behavior, noticing how often he initiated contact, whether he relies on a relationship for emotional support, and how much he values the mutual exchange of attention, care, and affirmation. Because self-awareness emerges from thoughtful reflection, prompted by absence. And this evaluation can also extend to consideration of your feelings, intentions, and potential perspectives as he tries to understand your silence, questioning whether it signifies disinterest, boundary setting, personal growth, or something else. And in doing so, he exercises empathy and attempts to view the relationship from multiple angles, which deepens his understanding and may influence future interactions, because assessing another person's intentions is a natural response when emotional bonds are involved, and the lack of direct communication encourages imaginative thinking and perspective taking. And during this reflective period, he may also weigh the importance of the relationship against other aspects of his life, considering time, effort, priorities, and potential trade-offs, because true evaluation requires contextualization within the broader scope of his emotional, social, and personal landscape. And this internal weighing can lead to important realizations, such as recognizing the need for better communication, setting clearer boundaries, or appreciating the depth of the connection more fully, because absence shines a light on areas previously unnoticed or undervalued, and it often sparks a reassessment of both emotional needs and the balance of give and take in the relationship. And this reflective process encourages critical thinking about personal desires, values, and compatibility as he contemplates whether the relationship meets his expectations, aligns with his goals, and contributes positively to his emotional well-being, because evaluation is not just about feelings, but also about assessing sustainability, fulfillment, and long-term alignment. And as he continues this introspection, he may notice shifts in perception, recognizing patterns of dependence, attachment, or emotional habits that were previously overlooked. And he may also consider how he has contributed to the dynamic, what he could improve, and how he might approach the relationship differently moving forward, because self-reflection often leads to action, able insights, and behavioral adjustments. And this internal assessment is compounded by natural curiosity, uncertainty, and desire for clarity, prompting him to mentally simulate potential scenarios, imagine outcomes, and weigh the consequences of reconnecting, maintaining distance, or changing his approach, because the mind seeks resolution when confronted with ambiguity, and the space created by your silence activates problem solving and emotional analysis simultaneously. And as he evaluates, he also experiences the interplay between fear and desire, wondering whether the absence signals rejection or a need for independence, while simultaneously feeling drawn toward reconnection and the emotional fulfillment the relationship provides, because human emotions are complex, and the simultaneous push and pull of attachment and uncertainty fuels deeper contemplation. And this evaluation process strengthens self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and relational understanding as he considers not only what he feels, but also why he feels it, how he responds to absence, and how he might engage differently in the future, because reflection without action is incomplete, and the brain naturally seeks integration between cognition and emotion to form a coherent understanding. And ultimately, when a man begins to evaluate his feelings in the relationship, he is navigating a rich internal process of emotional assessment, cognitive reflection, and personal insight, considering the significance of the connection, the quality of interactions, the alignment with his needs and values, and the potential for growth or change, because absence compels the mind to confront questions that constant presence might obscure. And this period of reflection often lays the foundation for clearer communication, intentional action, and deeper emotional engagement, because understanding one's own feline, NGS, and the dynamics of the relationship is a prerequisite for meaningful connection. And through this deliberate pause, he gains perspective, clarifies priorities, and strengthens emotional awareness, allowing him to approach future interactions with greater intention, insight, and authenticity, ultimately illustrating that strategic silence not only piques curiosity, but also catalyzes profound self-evaluation and relational understanding in a man's mind. When you intentionally do not reach out, the absence created can significantly increase a man's emotional valuation of the relationship and his desire to connect, because human psychology is deeply influenced by scarcity, contrast, and the perception of value. And when someone who was previously present and accessible suddenly becomes less available, the mind instinctively begins to reassess the significance of that person in life, amplifying both conscious and subconscious recognition of their importance. And this is rooted in the basic principle that people often appreciate what they cannot immediately access. And that absence provides a unique lens through which previously overlooked qualities, gestures, and interactions are highlighted, because the brain is wired to notice gaps and inconsistencies in patterns, which naturally triggers curiosity, reflection, and a deeper consideration of emotional attachments. And as he begins to notice your absence, he may experience an intensification of longing, desire, and emotional engagement, because the void created by distance encourages the mind to fill in the missing presence, replaying memories, recalling conversations, and mentally simulating interactions, which strengthens emotional bonds and reinforces the perception of your value. And absence also allows space for introspection, as he reflects not only on the connection, but also on what it means to him personally, emotionally, and relationally. And this reflection often increases appreciation for your qualities, your attention, and the emotional stability you bring, because contrast and distance illuminate significance that constant proximity can sometimes obscure. And in addition to deepening emotional recognition, absence can stimulate desire, because the mind responds to gaps by creating anticipation, imagining potential interactions, and generating curiosity about future engagement, which increases focus and mental energy directed toward the person who is absent. And this heightened attention often translates into increased motivation to reconnect, nurture the relationship, and act in ways that demonstrate care, investment, and interest, because emotional desire is reinforced when attention is sustained and curiosity is engaged. And as the period of absence continues, he may also experience a recalibration of priorities, reflecting on how the relationship fits within his broader life context, how much effort he is willing to invest, and how valuable the connection truly is to his sense of well-being and fulfillment, because absence provides clarity by removing habitual engagement and allowing assessment without distraction. And this recalibration often leads to greater intentionality in behavior, as he begins to consider how to maintain or strengthen the connection, avoid taking it for granted, and ensure that interactions are meaningful, consistent, and mutually enriching, because desire coupled with awareness naturally inspires action aimed at preserving or enhancing value. And the psychological effects of absence are also intertwined with attachment dynamics, as men process feelings of longing, anticipation, and the fear of loss, which in turn amplify emotional engagement and reinforce commitment, because scarcity creates psychological tension that motivates behavior, reflection, and investment. And this process is further enhanced by the natural human tendency to idealize what is temporarily unavailable, as the mind fills gaps with imagined positive qualities, desired interactions, and enhanced emotional significance, which increases both perceived value and desire. And as emotional value rises, he may also experience heightened responsiveness, attentiveness, and effort in future communications, because the mind links absence to increased significance, prompting more deliberate thought, reflection, and conscious engagement. And this effect is magnified when absence is combined with consistency in boundaries and self-respect, because the clarity that comes from intentional distance communicates value, confidence, and emotional intelligence, which are qualities that naturally inspire admiration and desire. And over time, the absence-induced increase in emotional value encourages not only reflection, but also proactive consideration of how to deepen the connection, express interest thoughtfully, and engage in ways that reinforce mutual appreciation, respect, and attraction, because emotional investment grows when scarcity is paired with meaningful interaction. And as he navigates this period, he is often motivated to clarify his feelings, prioritize the relationship in his life, and assess what the connection truly means to him, because absence creates space for perspective, evaluation, and the conscious recognition of significance, and ultimately the increase in emotional value and desire resulting from your absence is a combination of psychological principles, emotional reflection, cognitive assessment, and relational evaluation, because distance activates curiosity, attention, longing, and appreciation, which all converge to create heightened awareness of your presence, qualities, and importance, leading to stronger emotional engagement, more thoughtful behavior, and a deeper desire to connect meaningfully, demonstrating that strategic absence is not simply about withholding communication, but about allowing the mind and heart to recognize, assess, and elevate the emotional significance of the relationship in a man's perception. When you intentionally choose not to reach out, a man may begin to experience self-doubt or wonder about your interests, because the sudden absence interrupts the expected pattern of communication and attention, creating uncertainty that the brain is naturally compelled to resolve. And this uncertainty often triggers internal questioning about his own worth, behavior, and the dynamics of the relationship, because humans are wired to seek clarity in social connections and to evaluate their position and significance when patterns change. And as he reflects on the silence, he may replay past interactions, scrutinize messages, tone, gestures, or actions, and consider whether something he said or did might have caused your distance, because the mind instinctively searches for explanations and tries to make sense of unexpected changes. And this process can lead to heightened self-awareness as he begins to notice patterns in his own behavior that may have been previously overlooked, including tendencies toward complacency, lack of attentiveness, or assumptions about your interests, because absence acts as a mirror reflecting not only your presence, but also his engagement and investment. And the experience of self-doubt is intensified when the relationship carries emotional significance, intimacy, or long-term expectations, because the brain interprets the gap as a potential threat to connection or loss, prompting deeper contemplation about feelings, attachment, and priorities. And as he wonders about your interests, he may oscillate between hope, concern, and desire, because UNC Uncertainty generates emotional tension, compelling him to evaluate both the relationship and his own value within it. And this reflection often involves projecting possible scenarios, imagining your reactions, or mentally simulating future interactions, because the mind seeks resolution and reassurance when faced with ambiguity. And the presence of self-doubt can serve as a catalyst for growth, because it encourages him to assess his emotional needs, understand what he truly values, and consider whether he is demonstrating the effort, attention, and consistency required to maintain the connection. And during this period, he may also become more attuned to the dynamics of reciprocity, noticing whether his actions match his intentions and whether his engagement aligns with the level of emotional investment he desires, because the absence highlights imbalances and prompts a reassessment of priorities. And the uncertainty about your interests may also stimulate introspection regarding personal insecurities, fears of rejection, or previous relational patterns, because moments of silence force him to confront vulnerabilities that are often masked by routine interaction. And this self-examination can ultimately strengthen emotional intelligence as he learns to identify triggers, manage emotional responses, and evaluate attachment in a conscious and reflective way, because awareness of one's own emotional processes is a prerequisite for healthy relational engagement. And as he navigates the tension between doubt and desire, he may begin to evaluate the meaning and purpose of the relationship, asking questions about compatibility, alignment of goals, and mutual investment, because uncertainty compels prioritization and critical thinking. And the experience of wondering about your interests can also heighten focus and attention on the relationship, as he mentally tracks cues, cons, either's timing, and reflects on past patterns to infer your intentions, because the mind seeks information and meaning when faced with ambiguous social signals. And this period of reflection often leads to increased appreciation for your presence, care, and the qualities that initially attracted him, because absence magnifies value and encourages emotional contrast, showing what is meaningful only when it is temporarily unavailable. And self-doubt may prompt behavioral adjustments such as increased attentiveness, thoughtfulness, or deliberate efforts to communicate more effectively, because uncertainty motivates proactive action aimed at restoring perceived stability or enhancing the relationship. And over time, this introspection often strengthens both self-awareness and relational awareness, as he considers not only how he feels, but also how his behavior affects you, what he desires from the connection, and how he can maintain alignment between intention and action, because absence allows the mind to analyze, reflect, and recalibrate without immediate external input. And this process demonstrates the dual nature of self-doubt. While it can cause discomfort and anxiety, it also serves as a tool for emotional evaluation, critical thinking, and growth, because it encourages assessment of attachment, effort, and desire, ultimately leading to clearer understanding of personal and relational dynamics. And as he experiences doubt or wonder about your interests, he may also experience increased motivation to clarify the relationship, seek reassurance, or invest in meaningful engagement, because the brain equates uncertainty with a need for resolution. And desire for clarity often drives behavior that strengthens the connection. And by creating space through your absence, you allow him to explore his own emotions, assess his priorities, and recognize the significance of the relationship, because psychological distance encourages reflection that constant contact may obscure. And ultimately, the experience of self-doubt or questioning your interests is a natural and powerful effect of absence, because it heightens attention, fosters introspection, and creates an opportunity for both personal insight and relational recalibration, demonstrating that strategic silence can provoke thoughtful reflection, deeper awareness, and conscious evaluation of feelings, intentions, and emotional value in a man's mind, leading to more intentional, aware, and potentially meaningful engagement when contact resumes. When you choose not to reach out, the resulting pause in communication creates a powerful space for introspection and the evaluation of priorities in a man's mind, because human beings naturally seek to make sense of changes in social patterns, and the sudden absence of interaction forces reflection on both personal feelings and the broader dynamics of the relationship. And this introspective process begins subtly as he notices the void left by your unavailability, prompting him to consider not only how much he values the connection, but also how it aligns with his own goals, needs, and sense of self. Because absence interrupts habitual interaction and demands conscious assessment of significance, investment, and emotional attachment. And during this period of reflection, he may start examining the depth of his feelings, questioning what the relationship means to him, and evaluating whether it brings fulfillment, stability, and joy, because the lack of external input encourages internal dialogue, memory recall, and critical thought about what has been taken for granted or previously overlooked. And as he navigates this self-reflective space, he may also explore how his actions, attention, and priorities have contributed to the current dynamic identifying patterns of behavior that require adjustment, reinforcement, or deeper consideration. Because introspection involves both emotional evaluation and strategic thinking, which together influence future choices, and the pause allows him to assess his personal priorities. Because without the constant presence of your communication, he must examine how he allocates time, energy, and emotional investment, and determine whether his focus has been aligned with what truly matters to him, both within the relationship and in his broader life context. And this process often leads to a recalibration of attention, commitment, and goals, because the mind uses contrast and absence to measure importance, discern significance, and refine decision-making. And during this introspection, he may also confront fears, insecurities, or doubts, because moments of silence can trigger self-awareness regarding emotional dependence, attachment, or unexamined habits. And facing these vulnerabilities provides the opportunity to address them consciously, build emotional resilience, and make intentional choices about engagement, behavior, and relationship boundaries. And the space created by your absence encourages him to prioritize what is most meaningful, separating urgent distractions from lasting value, because the mind naturally evaluates scarcity and invests attention where significance is perceived. And this prioritization is often reinforced by reflection on personal goals, values, and desired outcomes, which are compared against the current state of the relationship. Because introspection without context is incomplete, and understanding how a connection fits into the broader life picture is essential for decision-making, alignment, and meaningful action. And as he continues to pause and reflect, he may develop a deeper awareness of emotional patterns, attachment tendencies, and relational expectations, because reflection engages both cognitive and emotional processing, enabling him to recognize areas for growth, adjustment, or enhanced communication. And this awareness can lead to more deliberate choices about how to approach the relationship moving forward, because insight gained during introspection informs intentional behavior, strategic engagement, and clearer boundaries. And the pause also encourages him to examine the balance between giving and receiving in the relationship, evaluating whether his efforts match his desires, whether his attention is reciprocated, and whether mutual effort contributes to satisfaction. Because the absence highlights relational dynamics that are otherwise masked by routine interaction. And as he navigates this period, he may begin to notice the nuances of emotional investment, communication patterns, and alignment of values. Because introspection allows the mind to detect subtle cues, assess consistency, and prioritize long-term significance over short-term gratification. And this reflective process is enhanced by the natural human tendency to seek resolution, closure, or understanding when confronted with ambiguity, because silence creates cognitive tension that motivates thought, evaluation, and self-assessment. And as he considers his priorities, he may also recognize the importance of personal growth, self-care, and emotional intelligence, because understanding one's needs and boundaries strengthens capacity for meaningful engagement and sustainable relational dynamics. And the space created by your absence allows him to reconcile internal desires with external behaviors, aligning intentions with actions and clarifying where effort should be directed, because clarity emerges from contrast, pause, and conscious reflection. And this process also encourages emotional regulation as he learns to manage uncertainty, anticipate outcomes, and navigate feelings without immediate external input, because emotional self-control is cultivated through reflection and deliberate mental engagement. And the pause can ultimately foster both maturity and responsibility as he considers how to act with integrity, respect, and attentiveness once communication resumes, because the combination of reflection and prioritization enhances decision-making, relational insight, and emotional investment. And as he navigates this introspective period, he may also develop greater empathy and understanding, not only for you, but for his own responses, needs, and behavioral patterns, because reflection fosters awareness of both self and others. And this awareness can lead to improved relational interactions, intentional communication, and strengthened emotional bonds. And by allowing space for introspection and priority evaluation, the temporary absence encourages him to differentiate between superficial engagement and meaningful connection, between reactive behavior and thoughtful action, and between transient distraction and enduring emotional investment, because the mind naturally prioritizes significance when given the opportunity to reflect. And over time, this process cultivates intentionality, clarity, and a deeper appreciation for the relationship, as well as for personal goals, values, and priorities. And ultimately, the pause you create through strategic silence acts as a catalyst for emotional and cognitive reflection, self-assessment, and prioritization, allowing a man to recognize what is truly important, evaluate his role and investment, and approach the relationship with renewed clarity, intention, and understanding, illustrating that absence is not merely a lack of communication, but a powerful tool for fostering introspection, realignment, and heightened awareness in the human mind. When you intentionally create strategic distance by not reaching out, it has the potential to strengthen both attraction and the dynamics of communication in a man's mind. Because absence generates psychological contrast, shifts perception, and allows space for reflection, which together enhance emotional engagement, anticipation, and the perceived value of connection. And this effect begins with the recognition that constant availability can sometimes diminish intrigue, familiarity can reduce attention, and overexposure can inadvertently foster complacency, because the human brain is naturally attuned to novelty, challenge, and patterns that shift unexpectedly. And by stepping back, you disrupt routine patterns, triggering curiosity, heightened focus, and an increased awareness of your significance. And as the brain processes your absence, it interprets it as meaningful, prompting evaluation of feelings, priorities, and the level of investment in the relationship, because the cognitive system seeks explanation for unexpected changes and fills gaps with attention and emotional energy. And this creates a natural increase in desire, because scarcity and contrast amplify perceived value, intensify longing, and heighten awareness of qualities previously taken for granted. And the strategic distance also allows him to experience the relationship with more perspective, reflecting on the emotional satisfaction, comfort, and stability it provides, because evaluation is more accurate when habitual access is removed, and this period encourages him to recognize patterns of mutual engagement, appreciate contributions, and consider ways to reciprocate, because absence fosters awareness of what is meaningful and worthy of effort. And in addition to increasing attraction, strategic distance strengthens communication dynamics, because it creates space for thoughtful, intentional exchanges rather than reactive or habitual interaction. And during this time, he may become more mindful of timing, tone, and content in communication, recognizing that each message carries significance. And this promotes more deliberate and meaningful connection, because when attention is limited, communication quality naturally becomes more intentional, precise, and emotionally engaging. And as he reflects during your absence, he may also assess compatibility, alignment of values, and long-term significance, because distance provides clarity, perspective, and an opportunity for self-evaluation that continuous presence may obscure. And the resulting self-reflection encourages personal growth, emotional intelligence, and improved relational strategies, because he begins to evaluate his own behavior, responses, and priorities within the context of the relationship. And this evaluation often leads to more balanced, considerate, and mutually satisfying interactions when contact resumes, because insight gained during the pause informs future engagement, fostering harmony, respect, and attentiveness. And the psychological mechanism behind strategic distance involves the interplay between curiosity, anticipation, and perceived value, because when something desirable is temporarily unavailable, the mind intensifies focus, emotional salience, and investment, which enhances both desire and motivation to reconnect. And this effect is reinforced when combined with subtle cues of attention, warmth, or engagement, because intermittent availability creates a pattern of reward, anticipation, and reinforcement, strengthening both emotional connection and attraction. And as he navigates this period, he may also experience heightened creativity, imagination, and mental simulation regarding interactions, potential outcomes, and desired communication, because the brain naturally fills in gaps and project scenarios when uncertainty exists. And this imaginative process amplifies emotional engagement, reinforcing interest, desire, and cognitive involvement. And strategic distance also encourages him to reassess priorities, boundaries, and personal values, because the pause highlights what is truly meaningful, important, and worthy of effort. And by reflecting on his investment, attention, and emotional responses, he develops clarity regarding his intentions, level of commitment, and approach to communication. And this leads to more purposeful, deliberate, and authentic interactions, because reflection during absence informs conscious behavior, fostering consistency, trust, and respect. And the strengthening of attraction through strategic distance is further amplified by the natural human tendency to value effort, consistency, and presence when it is not taken for granted, because absence provides the contrast necessary to notice qualities, appreciate attention, and recognize emotional significance. And as he experiences this space, he becomes more likely to engage thoughtfully, respond attentively, and demonstrate genuine interest, because the psychological and emotional salience of interaction is heightened by anticipation, scarcity, and conscious reflection. And over time, this dynamic produces a more balanced and meaningful connection where both parties appreciate effort, attention, and mutual investment, because strategic absence encourages evaluation, reflection, and prioritization of meaningful engagement. And as communication resumes, the relationship benefits from heightened awareness, intention, and emotional resonance, because the pause has strengthened curiosity, desire, and appreciation, allowing both emotional and cognitive systems to operate with clarity, insight, and focus, and ultimately using strategic distance to foster reflection, anticipation, and emotional evaluation transforms the dynamics of attraction and communication, because it leverages psychological principles, encourages introspection, and amplifies value perception, leading to interactions that are more deliberate, emotionally engaging, and mutually reinforcing. And by creating this space thoughtfully, you allow him to recognize significance, assess priorities, enhance desire, and approach the relationship with increased awareness, intentionality, and authenticity, demonstrating that absence is not a withdrawal, but a powerful tool to strengthen connection, deepen attraction, and improve the quality and dynamics of communication over time.